The avoidant never says it out loud, but deep inside, they know something painful and undeniable, something they would rather run from than face, and that truth is this. They can't afford your love, not because it lacks value, but because it demands a kind of emotional currency they never learned how to earn, and when you entered their life, you didn't just bring affection or attention, you brought depth, consistency, presence, and emotional truth. The kind of love that doesn't disappear when things get uncomfortable, the kind that asks to be felt instead of avoided. And at first, they were drawn to it, mesmerized by how safe it felt to be seen without masks, to be chosen without games, to be loved without conditions, but slowly that safety began to feel like pressure, because real love doesn't ask you to perform. It asks you to show up, and the avoidant has spent their whole life surviving by staying distant, by controlling closeness, by believing that attachment leads to loss, disappointment, or suffocation. So when you loved them openly, consistently, and deeply, it triggered something ancient inside them, a fear that whispered that they would eventually fail you, that they would be exposed, that they would be expected to give what they don't know how to give. And so instead of leaning in, they began to pull away, not because your love was too much, but because it was too real. And real love requires emotional presence, vulnerability, and accountability. Things they were never taught, things that feel foreign and dangerous to their nervous system. And every time you tried to connect, to communicate, to understand, it felt to them like standing in front of a mirror they didn't want to look into. Because your love reflected not only who they were, but who they weren't ready to become. And this is where the silent conflict begins. The avoidant still wants you, still feels something for you, still thinks about you when you're not there. But being with you costs them their emotional defenses, and they would rather lose love than lose control, because control feels safer than intimacy, and distance feels safer than vulnerability. And so they convince themselves that you're asking for too much, that the timing is wrong, that they need space, that love shouldn't feel this heavy, without realizing that the heaviness isn't your love. It's the weight of their unresolved wounds, and as they retreat, you're left confused, questioning your worth, wondering how something that felt so real could suddenly feel so cold, not knowing that the truth has nothing to do with you being unlovable, and everything to do with them being emotionally bankrupt. The face of genuine connection, because love, real love, is not something the avoidant can afford until they are willing to pay the price of healing. And most of them would rather walk away than face that cost, at least for now. What hurts the most is that while they walk away, the avoidant doesn't suddenly stop feeling. They just stop expressing. And this is the part no one tells you. Because distance doesn't erase attachment. It only buries it, and buried emotions don't disappear, they wait. And in the quiet after they leave, when your presence is gone, and your voice is no longer reaching them, something begins to unravel inside them. Because the silence they once craved starts to echo. And for the first time, there is no one asking them to open up, no one inviting them into connection, no one loving them in a way that exposes their emotional limits, and that relief they thought they needed turns hollow, because love didn't trap them, it grounded them, and now without it, they drift, replaying moments they pretended didn't matter, remembering the way you stayed calm when they pulled away, the way you tried to understand instead of attack, the way your love didn't demand perfection, only honesty. And this is when the internal war begins, because the avoidant is torn between two instincts, one that longs for the safety you represented, and another that panics at the idea of returning to something that requires emotional responsibility. And so they rationalize their absence, telling themselves you were too intense, too emotional, too available, when in reality, you were simply consistent. And consistency feels threatening to someone who learned love as something unpredictable or conditional. And while you are healing, questioning, growing, they are stuck in a loop of suppression, convincing themselves they are fine, that independence equals strength, that needing no one is freedom. But late at night, when distractions fade, your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. Because you loved them without forcing, and now they realize how rare that is, yet instead of reaching out, many avoidants choose pride over repair, distance over vulnerability, because reaching out would mean admitting they were wrong, that they ran, that they couldn't afford the love they were given, and that admission feels like weakness to someone who equates emotions with danger. so they sit with regret disguised as relief, missing you in ways they don't have language for, knowing deep down that the problem was never your love, but their inability to receive it without fear. And this is the tragedy of loving an avoidant, that you give something real to someone who only understands its value once it's gone. And even then, many of them would rather carry the loss than face the healing required to keep you, because healing demands accountability, presence, and courage, and until they choose that path, your love will always be something they wanted, felt, and lost, not because it wasn't enough, but because it was everything they weren't ready for. Eventually, there comes a moment when the avoidant can no longer blame timing, circumstances, or your expectations, because the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. And this moment often arrives when they see you thriving without them. Not bitter, not chasing, not waiting, but grounded, peaceful, and whole, and that is when the truth lands with full weight, because your absence no longer feels like freedom, it feels like consequence, and for the first time they understand that love was never trying to cage them. It was offering them a home they were too afraid to live in. And this realization cuts deep, because it forces them to confront the cost of avoidance. The relationships lost, the connections abandoned, the people who loved them sincerely and walked away wounded. And now you are no longer reaching out, no longer explaining yourself, no longer available to be misunderstood, and that silence feels heavier than any conversation ever did, because it reflects back their own emotional unavailability. And while part of them wants to reach out, to apologize, to rebuild, another part freezes, knowing that real repair would require them to show up differently, to communicate, to stay present when discomfort rises. And this is the crossroads avoidants face but rarely talk about, because returning to you isn't just about missing you. It's about becoming someone capable of holding what they once dropped. And not every avoidant chooses that path. Some will keep moving, repeating the cycle with someone new, hoping this time it won't demand depth, hoping surface-level connection will feel safer, but it never satisfies, because once you've tasted real love, you can't unknow it. And those who do choose growth, who finally face their fear instead of running from it, realize something life-changing, that your love was never unaffordable. It was an investment they were too scared to make. And by the time they understand that, you are no longer waiting to be chosen. You have already chosen yourself, healed the wounds their distance reopened, and learned the most important truth of all, that love should never require you to shrink, chase, or prove your worth to someone who cannot meet you emotionally. And whether the avoidant returns or not, you walk forward lighter, stronger, and free, knowing that the right love will never feel like something someone has to run from, because real love doesn't ask to be afforded. It meets you where you are and grows with you. And that is something no amount of avoidance can ever replace. With time, the story no longer centers on whether the avoidant ever understands what they lost, because the focus slowly and quietly shifts back to you, to the way your heart survived something that never gave you proper closure. And this is where the real transformation happens, because loving avoidant teaches you lessons no gentle relationship ever could. It teaches you how deeply you can love, how patient you can be, and also how dangerous it is to abandon yourself while waiting for someone else to arrive emotionally. And as the fog lifts, you begin to see the relationship clearly, not through longing, not through hope, but through truth. And the truth is that love should not feel like a constant negotiation for closeness. It should not feel like you are asking for too much when you are only asking for consistency, presence, and honesty. And once you understand this, something inside you settles, because you stop romanticizing their silence and start honoring your own emotional needs. And the avoidant, whether they ever admit it or not, becomes a chapter rather than the story, a lesson rather than a destination. And you realize that the reason their love felt so intense was not because it was sustainable, but because it was unbalanced. You were giving from fullness while they were giving from fear, and no matter how strong love is, it cannot survive where emotional availability is absent. And this awareness doesn't harden you, it refines you. It teaches you boundaries without bitterness, compassion without self-sacrifice, and love without self-erasure. And if the avoidant ever looks back, they won't just remember losing you, they will remember losing someone who loved with depth and grace, someone who tried, someone who stayed longer than they should have, and that memory will linger, not as regret you need to carry, but as proof of what you deserve, because the right love will not hesitate, will not pull away when things deepen, will not make you question your worth through distance and silence, and when that love arrives, it will feel calm, steady and mutual, not like something that needs to be chased or earned, and in that moment, the avoidant's inability to afford your love will no longer feel like a wound. It will feel like clarity, because you will finally understand that love choosing you back is not a luxury. It is the bare minimum, and anything less was never meant to stay. By the time you reach the other side of this experience, something subtle but powerful has changed within you, because you no longer confuse intensity with intimacy or distance with mystery, and you can finally see how your nervous system adapted to inconsistency, mistaking anxiety for passion, and waiting for crumbs as proof of connection. And this awareness doesn't come with shame. It comes with release, because you understand that you stayed not because you were weak, but because you were loyal, hopeful, and capable of deep attachment. Qualities that only become painful when they are offered to someone who cannot reciprocate them. And as you heal, you stop searching for meaning in their silence. You stop wondering if you could have loved better or waited longer, because the truth becomes simple and undeniable. The avoidant inability to meet you emotionally was never something you could fix, soften, or love away. And this clarity creates space for healthier connections, space for love that doesn't retreat when seen, space for partners who communicate instead of disappearing, and somewhere along this path, you forgive them, not because they deserve access to you again, but because you deserve peace, and forgiveness doesn't mean reopening doors. It means closing cycles, and if the avoidant ever crosses your mind now, it is without longing, without ache, without the pull to explain yourself one more time, because you finally trust that the right people don't need convincing. They arrive ready, present, and emotionally available. And this is where your story truly begins, not as someone recovering from abandonment, but as someone who understands their worth at a deeper level, someone who no longer offers love at a discount to those who cannot afford it. And when real love finds you again, it will not feel like something you have to prove or protect. It will feel natural, mutual, and safe. And in that safety, you will know without doubt that what you lost was not your future, it was a lesson. And what you gained was yourself. And if this message reached your heart, if these words felt like they were speaking directly to a part of you that has been silent for too long, know that you were never too much. You were simply offering real love to someone who didn't know how to receive it. And your healing begins the moment you stop waiting for people who run and start choosing yourself with the same devotion you gave away so freely, because the right love will never make you feel like you have to earn your place. It will meet you where you are and stay, and if you are on a journey of healing, growth, and self-worth, you don't have to walk it alone. This space was created for hearts like yours. So if this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, stay connected, and let these words remind you every time you feel weak that your love was never the problem. It was always the proof of how deeply you are capable of loving, and one day that love will finally be met, not avoided.